for the cost report training related to the FIT program cost study, which is currently underway, that we here at PCG are conducting in partnership with the New Mexico Early Childhood Education and Care Department. So I'm going to talk through now just briefly what you can expect from us today with the agenda. And then from there, we'll dive into some specific information related to the project and these tools. So here shortly, I'll introduce you to the PCG team very briefly. Then I'll also provide a brief overview of the project itself, so that the cost study. Then I'll provide some background specifically related to the cost report. So this next cost element of the cost study, we're currently have the time study underway. Y'all are here for cost report training. I'll provide some more background on that. And then my colleagues, Andy and Ted, are going to talk through each of the instruments with you all and how to complete those before we conclude at the end with some next steps and wrap up, which will be very brief. Just so you know, we do have some live Q&A time built in for both that personnel roster and cost instrument sections. So we will be taking your questions. We'll also be supporting you from here on out. We recognize that you all don't have the tools yet. You haven't started this process, and that many of your questions will come after you've started. So just real quickly, introductions. I should have led with this. My name is Greg Moore. I'm a senior consultant with Public Consulting Group. I'm the project manager for this engagement, working closely with Sarah Salisbury, who's really kind of the contract manager as a way to think of that engagement manager position. We have Ted Lindsay, who you're going to hear from today, an accountant with that expertise on the team. Andy Gom, many of you will already know Andy. He was formerly the FIT chief in New Mexico. We're glad to have him on. Joe and Zane are also on that advisory team. Our lead analyst is Amanda Dunlap. And then also working closely with her is Margot Hoagland, Courtney Reed, and Shelby Neely. So the cost study, an overview of the project. The purpose is to implement a comprehensive cost study for ECECD of the Family Infant Toddler Program to determine if providers are reimbursed at a reasonable rate in relation to the market for similar services and associated cost of service provision, and then also to potentially propose new rates for FIT services as appropriate. The goals is to conduct this cost study in such a fashion that it promotes best practices in early intervention, supports for recruiting and retaining qualified early intervention staff, and it provides an assessment of the budget impact of implementing any recommended rates. So here what you see is the methodology, the three primary components that make up our cost study. So the time study, your organizations, your staff are feverishly involved in that now. We really appreciate it. That's an Excel-based tool completed by all FIT practitioners. We're capturing the time that they're working on direct EI services and then related tasks in support of those services. We'll use that to align our expenses with services. Then the cost report, of course, that's why y'all are here. There's two components of this, both of which are Excel-based, cost instrument and a personnel roster. This is going to be completed by you all, your provider agencies. The cost instrument is going to capture revenue, personnel expenses, other expenses that you all incur within a fiscal year, specifically fiscal year 22 for early intervention services. And then the personnel roster is going to get very specific and capture information about all employees and subcontractors who worked with you in state fiscal year 2022. These will help us to understand the true cost of FIT service delivery for you all as providers. And then that last component there is a market analysis, which is PCG-led research that we'll conduct of salaries for similar professions within those FIT service definitions and standards. And we'll use that information to help us inform our rate calculations and to make sure everybody understands kind of where FIT in New Mexico falls within the broader market for EI services. What we have here is the project work plan and timeline. This has been in a number of our outreach and communication so far, so I won't spend a whole lot of time going through this other than just to say, you see there in the middle, we're in the time study. Then we're going straight into the cost report, and then we'll be taking all of this data with the market research, rolling that up, doing analysis, September, October, so that by November we can present some findings and recommendations to ECECD as well as the advisory group, which is another important point I wanted to make here. You see that stakeholder engagement there at the beginning. That's been important to us throughout, and we have had an advisory group comprised of FIT provider agency administrators, and so they've been tremendously helpful, and we look forward to continue to partnering with them through this project. All right, so the cost report itself. What's going to be collected? We're going to be collecting information on revenue, expenses, both personnel and non-personnel expenses, as well as service details, specifically from state fiscal year 2022. So that's July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. We're doing this to help the ECECD, kind of the purpose of the project, which we've already gone through. I'm going to move quickly through this because I think it's most beneficial for us to get to the tools themselves, but I think this next part is key. So we've had live trainings this week, then we'll be disseminating the tools and everything this week as well after this training. And the agencies, you all will have the next 2 weeks, so next week and the week after, to complete these. And I have Friday, September 16th, thinking that most people would be submitting it then, though technically I think we had scheduled it through that Saturday the 17th, just for that 2-week period, consistent with how we were calculating the time study period. And then that's what we're going to get into next, which is what I want to save the most time for. And that's you all will be completing 2 Excel workbooks. And then any backup documentation you have will be great. We do understand that we're talking about state fiscal year 22 data, and so a lot of this is going to be newly calculated. And so we're talking about, in many instances, with what we recognize will be unaudited financials. But we do need what backup documentation you have. And so we have the cost instrument and the personnel roster. And without further ado, I'm going to talk about a few resources and then have us get into those instruments themselves. So we'd like to remind folks you're not alone. All of your organizations are going through this. And in doing so, we are here to support you. We've had these live training sessions. We will continue live office hours similar to how we've done during the time study period. So each Tuesday and Thursday during the cost report from 10 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time, we'll hold office hour sessions where you all can call in, ask questions. We're also available via our email support, which you see there about the middle of the page. We have a devoted email specifically to this project. Going back up to those top bullets, we'll provide a recording of this training, which will be available there on the FIT Cost Study website, which you see the address for, as well as lists of frequently asked questions like we've done with the time study, the training PowerPoints, so these slides. And then also we have a Microsoft Word instructional document that gets pretty specific on walking you all through completing both the personnel roster and the cost instrument. And so that's going to be available to you too, just trying to provide you with as many resources as you can to make this as easy and comfortable as possible. So with that, I'm going to let Andy give you a little bit of background on the personnel roster, and then we're actually going to switch over and demonstrate that for you in using the Excel document.
Thanks, Greg, and great to see so many of my former colleagues from the FIT program. So we went through this process about 5 years ago, so where it's relevant, I'll point out where things have changed in the way that we're collecting the data this time around, but I think some of the changes you'll really like. So the personnel roster is really helpful and a really essential part of the overall cost study. One of the things, I'm not sure if Greg mentioned it, but we do look at the market salaries for the different roles that people play in the early intervention system, the different disciplines. And so finding out what we're paying within the FIT program, what we're paying your staff and your contractors, is really key for us to align that with what the market rate for those same personnel, perhaps in education systems or in clinics or hospital settings. So, and then aligning that to where we think you all need to be in terms of the rates to be able to reimburse those folks and hire and retain those folks. So, so this is our ability to collect that salary information. We are also going to be using the data to look at turnover. We got, as Greg pointed out, we're using an advisory committee of your colleagues, some of whom are on the call today, to advise us. And one of the things that they've wanted to look at is the turnover and the costs that incurs for providers. So I'll point out where we're collecting that a little differently. And then we're also going to be looking at the different qualifications and experience and certifications that folks have, particularly when it comes to paraprofessionals as opposed to professionals, and sort of delving into the details of that in our analysis. So all of that helps us with our rate modeling and rate build-up. So that's sort of the background of why the personnel roster is so detailed and enables us to do that analysis. So in case any of you were in the training that we did earlier this week, we're going to mix things up and do things a little different than just having slides with the information. We felt like it could be beneficial to walk through the tool itself. So hopefully you can see this on your screen. And we just felt like this would be helpful for folks to get an actual look at the Excel sheet that you'll get later this week. So some basic information. I guess I should probably pause to say, we know that this data may be collected from different folks across your organization. We know fit providers look very different, from big university systems to smaller nonprofits and everything in between. So this could be a collaboration between fiscal staff and HR staff and managers putting this together. And in some ways, it does mean going retroactively, not just the roster of your staff at this time or at the end of the fiscal year, but really looking at the full fiscal year. And we'll point that out in a minute, where we're going to capture folks that left your system or were hired into your FIT program part the way through the year. So, however, so even if there are several people that collaborate in your agency to put this together, we do need one contact name. We go through a pretty rigorous quality assurance, and occasionally there's just information that we need to clarify. So putting down who the contact information, even though, as I pointed out, there may be several folks that contributed to this. So here we've actually, Greg has actually added some folks here as if we had, PCG is now a FIT provider agency. So we've added some of our staff, pretending here that we're a FIT provider agency, just to give you a demonstration of what this might look like. We have many, many lines so that you can fill this out for all of your staff and contractors. And I think Greg pointed that out, but just to emphasize, Greg's scrolling down, it's an unlimited list of rows that you can enter your staff and contractors. And we know we had someone join us yesterday that has, I think, 2 or 3 staff all the way through to more than 100 staff. So, so please enter this for all of your staff and your subcontractors. So we've given the example here with actual names. We're fine if we protect all of this information. If it's easier for you to put the names in and then take them out later and just put a number in there or an initial in there, that's fine with us too. We don't actually need the names, but I would imagine as you're going through this, compiling it, actually putting the names in initially might be helpful for you to make sure you're collecting or entering the information on all of your staff and contractors. So employee type is here in the next column, column D here. And so this is both your salaried employees, if you have some hourly employees also, but then also any subcontractors. So again, we're wanting all of them to be entered here. Actual title, if is not needed for anything. If you've captured that in the primary or secondary role, Greg's scrolling over to capture that. You don't need to necessarily enter in there. We can get that from the column H, but particularly for administrators, or if you are a large agency and have someone who does training and QA, you might enter that as their actual title. And then one thing to point out is service coordination. Service coordinations are yes, no. We are really interested to look at folks in a dual role. So you'll see service coordinations in just a yes, no, and then you won't find them in the list of the drop downs for primary. And that's not to devalue their role there, but just we can get that information from the drop down. So, but we know also in the FIT program, many service coordinators play an early intervention service role in addition to service coordination, family service coordination. So if that's the case, then you'd be indicating service coordination, yes, no, and then whatever discipline that person is from in the primary. But it's fine if it's also just a service coordination in column G. One thing we're also tracking, and this came up a lot in the time study, is the supervision role or the multiple other administrative roles that folks often play in addition to their direct service role, providing early intervention or service coordination to children and families. So we define the service coordination, the supervisor role pretty broadly to include any of those functions. So it could be someone who provides direct services, but also does some quality assurance, or is an IDA lead, or is a coach in some way. So any of those folks. So here we're talking about supervision, or it could be reflective supervision. Maybe they don't supervise any staff, but they provide reflective supervision to folks, or they're a lead therapist over a group of PTs and OTs, and so they function in a lead role, and you fund them for that. And we'll show how you capture the funding and time for that purpose. So I think you can scroll over a little bit, maybe to capture the bilingual. This is bilingual if not just that the person speaks another language or can write another language, but they're using that in terms of their work with families or in some kind of other translation role for their interpretation role for the agency. So the next three columns are where you can capture a little bit more to tell us about the qualifications, professional certifications, licensure of the folks. And again, that's helpful for us to really analyze the data and the salaries based on those things. So I would ask you to add as much as you can. One question we got asked earlier in the week was around developmental specialists, and we know the FIT program has different levels of developmental specialist certification, so would ask that you include that here too. So here's where we get in column N and O, we get into the turnover. So in the past, we really would just, when we did this 5 years ago, I believe we only captured folks at the end of the year. Here we are asking you to look at the full year. Now, if someone was hired by your agency 6 years ago, 12 years ago, 20 years ago, we don't need you to delve back into their personnel file and find out exactly when they were hired. If someone was with you the full 12 months, and just to remind folks, we're looking at last fiscal year, so that's July 1st of 2021 through to June 30th of 2022. If they were with you the full period, you can just enter that period. So again, July 1st of 2021 through to June 30th, 2022. And you don't need to go back and find when they were actually hired. However, if they did come on board partway through the year, maybe you hired them in November, you would put the date in November that they were hired, and then they were with you through the whole year. And then similarly, if they were with you for part of the year and then left, you would put the beginning of the year and then the time when they left employment or contracting with your agency. So that's all going to give us great information about what does that turnover rate look like, and we know that there's associated costs with bringing folks on board. So that's going to be great information, and we're glad that the advisory group advised us and advised the ECCD to include that. Don't know if this is going to be that applicable, but we do want to capture if there's any folks that were furloughed during the time because of the pandemic. That may have been more true in the previous years, but there could have been some folks that were furloughed during this time period. So if so, what was the period or the number of hours that they were furloughed? Okay, so here we get into really a lot of the meat and potatoes of the actual how much are people getting reimbursed. And we've added a little bit based on some feedback around FTEs that we think will be really helpful when Ted goes over the cost. This is good. FTEs is always confusing. It seems like it shouldn't be that confusing, but we've actually now calculated the FTE, which I think you're going to be really helpful. It's going to be really helpful for you. But let's start with column Q. So this is the number of hours that that person works for you if they're salaried. So if you're a 40-hour a week, and then we know that the work week will differ by agency, but if it's a full-time 40-hour and that calculates, right, Greg, at the top, if just to give you the full-time hours, I think that's right. That puts that in there for you.
Does.
Is that right, Greg?
It calculates.
That's really handy.
And so, just to piggyback there, Andy, we are asking folks to enter their what constitutes a full-time work week in that yellow cell, and that will help compute everything.
That's great. Thanks for clarifying that. So both it's something that's helpful for us, but it's also helpful for you, because then maybe you know right off the bat that full-time at 40 is 2080, but maybe you're a 37.5 hour or a 35-hour week, so that calculates that for you. And so you can enter the full-time. If it's a contracted person, that may be a little bit more difficult. We've heard from a few agencies that they don't maybe track the number of hours. They pay their contracts in different ways. So if you can't do the hours, we're not asking you to go back into kids and work out how many hours they did. If you can do that, we'd love that. We do think most agencies, based on the feedback, are able to put the number of hours that contractors work, and certainly that gives us, and you'll see that also then calculates the FTE hours when we get to that. So moving along, so we've got the hours worked in the year, if you can do that. Then we move into the salary or the amount paid. So hopefully you have that on file. And then similarly, the fringe benefits for employees. Obviously, contractors won't have the fringe. So the next two columns, again, if you have accurate information, some agencies have told us, yes, they can actually break out exactly, I pay this person 5 hours a week to be a QA specialist and an IDA lead, or they do reflective supervision over the month for 10 hours. And others don't have that broken up so much. If someone is in a dual role of, here we're calling it direct services, direct to EI, and some kind of supervision or administrative support services. And again, we define those in the information that we'll provide for you. So if you don't have exactly the number of hours, we would ask that you do your best estimate. And again, if it's 5 hours one week, 4 hours the next, 3 hours another, come up with a estimated percentage of the direct time and then the support time, the supervision and support. I probably should have led off, and I think I didn't, because it's the third column there. Really, the first thing is to say we are only wanting to capture time, number of hours, and amount compensated related to fit activities. And we know that therapists or others in the agency, and certainly managers, might be managing another program. Maybe they manage respite or home visiting, or maybe even a child care program that your agency administers. So you can do that in two ways. You can either say of their total amount compensated, and we've given a couple of examples here that I think Greg's the first line. 10% of Greg's time is non-fit related, so his salary needs to, in some ways, and time needs to be discounted by the 10%, because 10% was dedicated to respite. And maybe the trainer, I'm just making this up, on line 16 is 50% training for fit and 50% for the DD waiver. And so again, you can take out that time that's to the DD waiver or whatever other program, and that will take that out of the calculation. So that's really the first thing. The other way to do it is just to say their time is half of the 2,080 hours is dedicated to fit, and we're not even going to talk about the hours that they do to other programs. So you can do that in either way. So once you've done that, column V is the percentage that they do to non-FIT programs that your agency operates. Then I think as a second step, looking at column T and U, then the percentage of that time that's direct service is compared to supervision and support. I would point out that we've added a column. It really is just as a quality assurance. We know that folks can't be, even though we know sometimes people work more than 40 hours a week, but we know that their time should only be allocated up to 100%. So if you see that by putting in the percentages, oops, they're now 110%, 120, 130%, that means that the percentages in columns T, U, and V need to be reallocated to get that to 100. So we've just added column W there just as a quality assurance for you to make sure that those numbers are adding up correctly. This is the one I think you'll be excited to not have to calculate FTE. FTE is a decimal as opposed to percentage, and that causes confusion. You've got to look at what the work week is and what number of hours are being provided. So we've, thanks to our data team, have added a calculation, and again, Ted will show you where these go onto the cost form. It's really helpful for us to look at how many FTEs agencies have and breaking that out by direct service and admin time. Again, knowing that, yeah, you may have a full-time manager, but there's other people that are providing supervision and admin responsibilities. So I forgot to point out that all of the cells that are, and you'll probably be pleased because we're up to, by the end, column AB, so quite a number of columns, but the columns that are shaded in green here are auto-calculated. So they're basically taking the data that you've entered in previous columns and putting in the data here, both FTEs, hours, and the actual expenses for the FIT program. And you'll see that the totals are also tally at the top. The reason we put it at the top is because some agencies have so many staff and contractors that then you'd have to be scrolling all the way down to the bottom. So we've just had them add up, and you're probably more used to things tallying at the bottom, but we felt like it's more helpful then to be able to use these data for your cost data. And in our quality assurance, we would be looking, as you will hopefully, look at these numbers compared to the numbers that you're reporting on the cost form. So with that, I think I've gone through that at a pretty fast clip. We will certainly have time for questions. And is that where you want to go, Greg, to see if there's some questions, or is there anything else I needed to cover on the roster?
No, sir, you're exactly right. We were going to open it up for see if folks have any questions yet related to the personnel roster.
We'll have some time at the end of the training too, if nothing occurs at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. No pressure. We want to be a support, but we recognize that folks will need some time to digest some of this. Sharon, I see that you have your hands up.
Yes, good morning. I have a question on the if an employee works the entire year, do we need to put in the start date and the end date, or did you say we just put in 7/1 to 6/30?
Yeah, that's right, Sharon. So yeah, if they were with you the full year, you can just put the start and end date for that fiscal year. And I did forget to say, so this is an opportunity, I'm glad you asked it. You can cut and paste those cells. You can't drag them down, or we'd ask that you don't drag the value down like you can in Excel, that you actually do copy and paste. Dragging messes up things in the back end. But yeah, if the majority of your staff have been with you the whole year, you can just cut and paste those cells. So you're not having to key into 7/1 2021 to 6/30 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Sharon. Good to hear from you.
Yeah, good question. That's a good point of clarification. Thanks, Sharon. Anybody else have a question? Well, if something occurs to you, by all means, we're going to pause again at the end of this for some more Q&A. If there is any, feel free to type anything in the chat. And then again, we recognize that the questions may come in a few days next week, which is totally fine. We'll be here to support you then as well. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ted to talk to you all about the cost instrument specifically.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, and hopefully my internet will work with me today. Last presentation, it did not. So, you know, just fair warning there. In this area of the country, it's a little spacey at times. So apologize for that in advance. But anyway, so next is the cost report here. So, so why do we use a cost tool? Well, the answer is really twofold here. It's your rates typically take into account the expenses and other costs to provide services. So having this view of your costs and expenses is extremely helpful to us to collect and understand as part of the study. The cost report allows us also to see the true cost of fit service delivery. So it pulls in and ties the personnel roster data and also incorporates your revenue details. Naturally, these are all important pieces to understand the rate development process. So next slide, please. So as we jump to the tool, just a quick reminder, a couple things that you need to just make sure here is that you have an appropriate and knowledgeable agency staff member that's completing this tool and personnel roster. As we've said before, the reporting period is the state fiscal year 2022, which is from 7/1/21 through 6/30/22. As well, these are due by the end of day Friday, September 16th, although I think they can also be turned in a little bit late on that Saturday, the 17th. But the deadline is really Friday the 16th. So if you look at the top here, obviously the first thing we need to do is complete your initial contact information. So this is a fairly typical contact section, but a few call outs here is we do have some drop down boxes under the FIT provider agency name, provider IRS tax status, which is you can identify for profit, government, or nonprofit. And as well, there's the county drop down a little bit below. As well, make sure you put in your program name, if different, and then your address, and then just make sure we've got good contact name, position, email, and phone in the case that we need to contact you back. Next slide, please. So next is the revenue section. So please provide us here with the FIT program revenues, which would include any federal funds, grants, donations, and as well any in-kind contributions if you have that amount. We've got spots for federal funds and others, so please, for these, utilize the notes comments section there over to the right and describe your revenue sources. Try to break out exactly what those are for us. As well, if you can, please describe how the pandemic impacted certain revenue areas, if that's noteworthy. So historically, any notes we get here are usually extremely helpful. So please fill out the notes section out as much as you can. Next slide, please. So for the personnel details and expenses, as Andy went over a little bit ago, this is where you're going to use some of those cells there that do those auto calculate. So here at the very top, direct service FTEs, admin FTEs, these are the boxes that you will put those values in. If it's 1, 2, however many employees, this is where you'll go and list those in. As well, if you have independent contractors that are direct service admin, you'll also put them in here as well. In the green are all areas that will do sums. So it's going to sum that. And as well, then here just below that, there's a little highlighted section for any vacant employees. We'd love to know that information. What are the vacancies? As well, you may have to do a little kind of creative math a little bit on if you have a number of employees that, let's say 10 employees that, kind of build down in the tool to say 5, you may have to kind of do a little math to figure out how many a a vacant FTE or admin might be. So if you need help, we can definitely help you kind of come up with a calculation and what seems appropriate. But we are looking for that information as well to kind of help give us kind of a more holistic view of the FTEs in total. Below, we do ask for holidays, vacation, and sick, and just those average days per person per year here. So holidays is the number of federal, state holidays that you observe as a program. So leave a note if you don't break out vacation and sick. In a lot of cases, you guys don't. And then record all those in vacation. So for, let's see, a little below that, then we've got the total fit costs for each of those. So then again, in the tool, you've got spots for in the personnel roster columns, AA and then AB will be your fit costs that will go over in here, and just break those out then by the employee salaries. You've got the taxes, split those out for taxes fringe, then administrative employees, same thing. And as well, there's spots to break out hourly and then independent contractors. And then that will give us the total personnel expenses here at the bottom. That should match your total fit personnel expenses on your personnel roster. So do take a minute after you're done looking at, when you've filled out these, take a second, step back, get a coffee break, and then just go back and look and just make sure that everything is aligning from form to form. We do see quite a bit when we're looking at these. There's some that are just not gelling, and then that requires us to go back and follow up and use more time. And your time is very valuable, we know. So take an extra second or two and look those over just to make sure everything aligns. Next slide, please. So for the non-personnel expenses, we're definitely going to park here for a minute and go over this one. But you'll need to fill out your total expenses for each of these major groups and categories. This is typical of what you'll find either on your profit and loss, or for many of you, your statement of activities. So you'll need to go through. We tried to make this as all-encompassing and yet try to kind of make groups to kind of assist you guys a little bit in filling this out. So there are some areas like rent, mortgage, and utilities that we have broken out themselves. But then some other areas, as right in the middle, we have like personnel services that will include all cleaning, accounting, security, really anything that we have outside services for. It's not necessarily we have to break those down. So we're trying to be cognizant of big groups. So don't let that throw you guys. As well, office supplies, anything that you consider office supplies there. So as you're filling this out, look at that, either that profit and loss statement of activities. You may have, for our accounting folks that are here, a number of accounts that may fall in that you may utilize when and having to add up when filling these out. But back over to the top, I do want to call your attention to the administrative cost allocation. Not everybody will have this, but what this will be is generally an overhead cost allocation that you may not necessarily pay out of your books. You may be under government agency or a group of providers, and so you may have an allocation where it's just it'll go over on your profit and loss or statement of activities. So that's what you would, and for those you wouldn't necessarily have costs that you are spending money on. And this is typical of rent, mortgage, utilities, and things that are kind of shared services. So that's what you would do here. If you have one, if you have an allocation, then you would list the amount here. And then to the right, then go over and just make notations about what accounts those cover. That's going to help us quite a bit be able to tell what that encompasses. And we just want to obviously make sure we're not missing anything. And then you wouldn't break anything out if let's say your allocation covered rent, utilities, and licenses, then you wouldn't have anything in those cells except for that administrative cost allocation. So that's what that is. Again, not everybody has those. So kind of going down, the next kind of big area that I'll call your attention to is that depreciation expense, furniture, fixtures, and equipment expense below it. So what we're trying to get here is, and really the difference is your capitalized expense versus your non-capitalized. And what that means is there's going to be some bigger items that you may put on your fixed asset listing. That can be sometimes cars, big pieces of furniture, expensive equipment. And so what you can do, obviously, is not put all that on the books and expense that all in one period. You can expense that over many months, years, that sort of thing. So what we're trying to capture here is that depreciation expense, and you should find that on your profit and loss or statement of activities for the year. We're trying to get that capitalized expense there. And this is not going to be the full cost of equipment here. This is just going to be that depreciation expense that you would have for this year, for this time period. The next one, the furniture, fixtures, and equipment expense, is really more for the minor asset items, and those could be chairs, filing cabinets. It could even be a desk, or for some of you who that could be computers possibly. So those are going to be kind of your incendiaries, those sort of things. For those, you would actually give us the entire cost because those are getting expensed in the period for the year. So you'd want that total there and put that. So I don't want that to confuse anybody. We did have that for some other studies we've been in. So take note of that. And again, if you've got questions, let us know. We can walk you through that. Leased equipment, if you've got any leased equipment, typically those are copiers and vehicles, list those here. And as well on the right, give us, listing of at least tell us what you're leasing. We've got a section then for COVID related PP&E, add those together. And we also this time have a spot for interpreter services and translation services. So take note of those. And as we go down, the only other call out really I've got here is that other expenses. We may not have captured every single possible category. So if it is something that doesn't really fit in any of these other buckets, you can list them over here in the other expenses. We just ask that in the right. You tell us what that is. What is that other expense? What does that incorporate? So that can help us for sure. And that will total our non-personnel expenses at the bottom in the green, and then what that total expenses there below it will be the total of non-personnel and personnel expenses in total. Next slide, please. As well, we have a section for attestation. So yes, you just have to go in and electronically sign this with your name, title, and it's not anything like DocuSign, so you can go in and just type out your name, the date. But there's a section above for memo, and please fill that in. If there's anything that we have missed or anything that we need to know that you think is important material for this study, please let us know. That way, we can understand what the situation is, or kind of work with you a little bit. Some other providers have gone through and let us know, hey, just to know, hey, when I filled out this in this section, this is what this really means, and we've made notation, but I just want you to see that, or our goals for the future, and we expect to see X, whatever that is. So if you deem that necessary for that additional context, let us know. Put that over in there. Next slide, please. Obviously, well, before we kind of get into questions, obviously, yes, there's some financial information that we're asking. Please, everyone, provide to go along with that helps kind of back up this information. I think most will probably have unaudited financials, which is totally fine. But just make sure that you are providing us the supporting documentation for this information. So with that, we will open it up for any questions that you guys have on the cost report.
Thanks, Ted. Anybody have any questions? I know Ted was thorough, but don't be shy if you have questions, or feel free to ask a question if I want to encourage you about the personnel roster. We're here to support you, so we're glad to answer anything. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions, so I will kind of move us into some next steps and wrap up, and then allow some time at the end in case any questions occur to folks. So key takeaways for y'all here. And we repeated it many times. Sorry, it's just we want to be clear. We are talking about state fiscal year 2022. So again, July 1st of 21 through June 30th of 22. Both the personnel roster and the cost instrument are due at the same time. We've said Friday, September 16th, recognizing that some people may need an additional day. Please also submit any accompanying backup documentation. You'll see there that second sentence under that bullet says an audited financial statement of the same or similar time period is preferred. Obviously that's preferred, but we've tried to be clear throughout this that we recognize with the timing of this that a lot of what we're going to be getting from you all is unaudited financials, and that obviously that makes sense with timeframes. Questions once you started, we'll have resources on the website, and including a list of frequently asked questions. We can also be reached each business day at the email address there. We're paying attention to that, getting back with folks, and we'll continue to do so throughout the project. We're also going to be holding office hours to answer questions each Tuesday and Thursday beginning next week and the week after, so 10 a.m. You all's time there in New Mexico. The personnel roster should be filled out by someone with knowledge of staff salaries and background based on what it covers. Similarly, the cost report should be filled out by fiscal staff based on the information that it covers too, that my colleagues have gone through. And then just next steps here, we will be sharing the Excel files as well as the tools, the personnel roster, the cost instrument with the champions and administrators. We're also going to be sharing frequently asked questions, links to the recording of this training, the training slides, those types of resources that we talked about earlier. They'll be made available this week. The detailed instructions document, and then of course the cost report period will begin next week, and then we'll host our office hours sessions and be available via email. But we very much appreciate you all's participation today and in the cost report and the broader cost study itself. Your information input really is invaluable, and so we appreciate that because we also recognize how much you have on your plates as it is. So thanks to each of you. And with that, I will pause in case anybody has any additional questions. We're glad to take those, discuss, but that concludes our formal presentation. And so if there's anyone who could benefit from having a few minutes back in their day, by all means, you're welcome to log off. But we're glad to stick around and answer any questions folks have. Any remaining questions at this time?
Looks like Sharon has raised her hand.
Hi again. I do have a question. We have an admin ECI staff, and she would, I would think, go on the personnel roster since she is totally 100% admin for the early intervention. Would that be correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then the accounting and everybody else could go under professional services.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, I just wanted to get it straight. Thank you so much.
Great question, Sharon. Thanks for chiming in. Any other questions? Okay, well, we won't keep you all here needlessly. We'll give you a little bit of time back in your day, but again, stay tuned. You'll be receiving all these materials soon. And then again, just please know we're here to support you. So as you start to dig into this and look at the tools and you're getting your information together, as Ted and Andy and myself have all explained, please let us know if you have questions. We're glad to help out. So with that, we hope that you all have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it, guys.